Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Happy to have you with us. Fun show today. I think we have a very appropriate golden shoe to give you today at the very end of the show. There's more chatter about a very bold idea that an SEC coach has. This starts to seem like it's building some momentum. We'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. Both quarterbacks that are competing to be Georgia's starter, we'll hear from them today. Brock Vandagriff, Carson Beck on a specific subject, and I'll explain why. I think this is good news for UGA no matter who ends up winning the quarterback competition. We will talk about that. But off the top of the show here, there is something that I have to admit I'm a little bit angry about, but Kirby Smart has the perfect response to the thing that makes me angry. This is a really fun way to kind of get our show started today, so we're not going to waste any time in getting right to it. We will tell you, though, we're glad to have you here. Looking forward to Terrence Edwards in a few minutes there as well. It is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of Dawg Nation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, you would think I'd be in a great mood today. It's the home opener for the Atlanta Braves tonight. I've got my Braves jersey on today. Lucky enough to be going to the game tonight. The Masters starts today. One of my favorite sporting events, one of the single best sporting events in the entire sporting world. That gets going in Augusta. A proud moment for our state. I'm excited about that. So there's a lot going well for those of us who are sports fans here in the state of Georgia that you would assume that you couldn't slap the smile off my face today. I'd be such a great mood. And to a certain extent, I guess I probably am. But I am a little bit more bothered, maybe even more bothered than I should be, about something that I have read at the pages of DawgNation.com, quoting a story from ESPN. Let me explain it this way, and then eventually we're going to get to a happy ending on this because Kirby Smart's got the perfect retort to all of this. So if you go to DawgNation.com, you can read a story from Mike Griffith, who kind of looks at a story from ESPN.com as an examination takes place of what is it going to take to beat Georgia? Can anybody beat Georgia? Now, there's a certain tone to the article at ESPN.com that almost sounds like, could somebody please step up and show Georgia some competition? There seems to be a little bit of begging and wishing going on with some of this kind of stuff, which, you know, is enough to aggravate you maybe a little bit if you're a Georgia fan. But there is one thing in particular that sort of bothers me about what I read from Mike at DawgNation.com looking at this ESPN.com story. And I'll put a link to all this when I post the show later on our website ourselves at DawgNation.com later on today. Here's the thing that bothers me. Somehow, some way, ESPN always seems to find an anonymous coach who's willing to rip Georgia. This was true before the Georgia-Tennessee game and, before the college football playoff. It just seems like that somehow, somebody always seems to have on their Rolodex some coach who's willing to, under the cloak of anonymity, give some sort of salacious quote about something not quite being right about Georgia. Now, this one I'm about to read isn't as bad as some of the things we've heard in the past, but it certainly comes along a pattern of somehow, even though Georgia has gone, 29-1 of the last 2 years, won the last 2 national championships, for whatever reason, that's never quite enough to impress the collection of anonymous coaches that seem to be ready, willing, and able to be quoted by ESPN. Do you notice that? Am I the only one who notices that? Does that make me crazy that I am kind of pointing that out? But nonetheless, let me read this to you. Anonymous coach, ESPN. Of course, Heather Dinich, you're not surprised to find out that she's the writer in all this. But nonetheless, here's the anonymous coach. Then the question is, can anybody beat Georgia this season? Now, here's what the anonymous coach says. Well, Alabama can. He says Missouri should have. He says the best thing that can beat Georgia is Georgia, but a fast-paced offense like Tennessee would have some type of chance. Alabama, obviously Ohio State. After that, probably not a lot. But I think the best opponent Georgia would have is Georgia not playing well because they are that dominating. That's Heather Dinich quoting this anonymous coach there at ESPN on that. Do you mind leaving that on the screen just for a second? Because I want to kind of get into this for a minute. Now, for the most part, this actually isn't that negative of a statement because the coach does, kind of reiterate here that they are that dominating. But the part that kind of aggravates you is this notion that it's obvious that Alabama can beat Georgia. Why is it obvious that a team that lost twice this past season could beat a team that went undefeated? There is a degree to which I think this offseason, Alabama has been continually inflated, despite the fact that on the field last year we saw this program actually regress, and it is not obvious right now that Alabama has a capable starting quarterback currently in its program. They might. I guess you'd say they probably will, but it's not obvious that they do. So this notion that it's just a given, well, of course Alabama can. I mean, my gosh, it's Alabama. Well, last year Alabama didn't exactly feel like Alabama anymore. We may be in the midst of a change there on that. But the other part of this particular quote that kind of aggravates me a little bit, admittedly maybe more than it should, is the coach says on the idea of who could beat Georgia, a fast-paced offense like Tennessee would have some type of chance. And the word would there seems to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in that particular sentence, as if this is some sort of hypothetical situation. Well, if you could ever get Georgia and Tennessee on the same field at the same time, then maybe at that point a team like Tennessee might have a chance. As if these two teams didn't just play a couple of months ago. And Tennessee didn't have a chance. Georgia could have beat it as bad as it wanted to, but it started to rain. Georgia didn't want to stand out there and get wet, so it got out of the game with an easy win. But that was a non-competitive game. That was not a competitive football game. Tennessee could not lift a finger to provide any resistance to Georgia on either side of the ball. And this idea that you want to have this hypothetical situation. Well, listen, Tennessee's offense so fast-paced, maybe they might be able to do this. Well, we saw that happen, and we also saw these two teams play, same coaches, going back in Knoxville in 2021. That game was even more of a blowout. So, let's not assume that the venue is going to change the result when these two teams play this season there as well. But nonetheless, that's the anonymous coach, a little skeptical about Georgia, and part of me wants to know, and you can bring that down now, part of me wants to know, when ESPN does this, is it always the same anonymous coach? Because that's the one thing that you never quite understand. Is it a different anonymous coach that's ripping Georgia every time? Is it the same anonymous coach each and every time? We're never quite so sure about that. But in this same sort of ESPN.com, there was a coach willing to go on the record about Georgia, willing to be quoted on the record about UGA. Mike Griffith had this in a story at DawgNation.com, originating, I guess I should say, from the ESPN piece. Brian Kelly talked about this. And most of what Kelly says here, you can't really have too much, to kind of squabble over. But nonetheless, I want to read this to you. Brian Kelly on what it would take to beat Georgia. Kelly saying, we scored enough points, but we couldn't match up physically yet, he says. But then he goes on to say, you look at the other teams. Obviously, Ohio State had enough of that to take them right down to the wire. That's Brian Kelly, once again quoted by ESPN.com on the idea of Georgia. And there's nothing you can say too much here to kind of specifically be angry with Brian Kelly about. That's a factually accurate statement for the most part. Maybe a little bit wishful to think that one day they will be able to physically compete with the UGA. But nonetheless, you can't sort of have too much of an issue with that. But I do kind of find myself once again kind of amazed at the narrative around the Georgia-Ohio State game from New Year's Eve, and this notion that Ohio State somehow proved more in that game than Georgia did. And to me, this is where, I'll put my fan hat on for a minute, this is where I do genuinely believe that Georgia just kind of gets treated unfairly a little bit, because I think the way this game has been kind of discussed and spun after the fact is that, Ohio State's offense proved that if you've got that great offense, you can find some vulnerability with the Georgia defense. And somehow the game was a negative about the Georgia defense, and that becomes the more significant issue from the game. Whereas, y'all, what did we hear for years prior to this game? For years, what we heard prior to this game was, the Georgia offense can't keep pace in a shootout. If Georgia ever gets into a situation where it's a shootout, they can't keep pace. So to most of us who are Georgia fans, the Peach Bowl against Ohio State was proof that, hey, in a game in which you do get into a slugfest, in a game in which points are required, in a game in which you're going to have upwards of 90 points scored in the game, then Georgia can be just fine in that game too. That Georgia has a preferred way to beat you, but if you force Georgia to play a different way, the Peach Bowl proves that Georgia's capable of doing that too. That's the narrative that most of us who are Georgia fans would say about all of this, but it sort of seems like the rest of the folks, and I think a lot of this is just sort of wishful thinking and hoping that college football won't be boring this year. The team that's won 29 of its last 30 games runs right through the sport again, winning another 15. It seems like we kind of have a little bit of a narrative shift here of, instead of saying, can the Georgia offense get it done, now it's one of those things of, look at Georgia's defense. It didn't get it done. That could spell trouble for this upcoming season. It's all wishful thinking, but nonetheless, if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're justified in being a little bit aggravated by all of this. But here's the good news. Whether, it need be or not, Kirby Smart, I think, provides a great response to all of this because, You've got anonymous coach here saying, what's it going to take to beat Georgia? You've got Brian Kelly trying to address that there as well. And by the way, interesting to know that Kelly would even be quoted in a story like this. Do you think that Kirby Smart would ever be quoted in an ESPN story talking about some other coach, some other team? Heck no. Heck no. You know, there was this thing years ago where Jack Nicholson, the great movie star, not the golfer Jack Nicklaus, but the great movie star Jack Nicholson, he wouldn't appear on television, wouldn't be a guest in the Johnny Carson show or anything like that. Things were popular at the time. His belief is that movie stars, big screen stars, didn't belong on small screens. And I think there's a little bit of that with Kirby Smart. Whereas if you're the big coach, if you're the bull of the woods, if you're the leader in your profession, you don't become a source in a story about somebody else. That's what a big screen star would do. You don't go to the small screen. And Kirby Smart, I think, is kind of like that, where he's not going to be a source for a story about somebody else. Brian Kelly, interesting that he would be. I think that diminishes him by doing that. But nonetheless. So Kirby Smart, I think, has a great response to all of this about exactly why it was that Georgia was able to go 15-0 last season and why Georgia is going to be expected by many to go 15-0 again this season too. And it comes from something we told you about the other day. So Kirby Smart makes an appearance on the Coach K podcast, which I wasn't even aware of. I guess that's why you have stuff like this. Now I'm aware that Coach K has a podcast. And you talk about two contrasting personalities, right? I mean, you know, Coach K is very professorial. He's very, I don't know, I guess he would consider himself to be distinguished, you know, a little bit stuffy, you know, kind of, you know, self-serious. You know, Kirby Smart just sort of a dude, right? You know, he's a football coach. A very, very different type of personalities here. And so Coach K is congratulating Kirby Smart for winning his second straight national championship. And Kirby Smart gets into why it is that Georgia has won all these games in a row. And what you're going to notice here is how shocked I think that Coach K is by what Kirby Smart has to say. This is a level of intensity that Coach K, as a basketball coach in the erudite ACC, is not quite used to here. So listen to Coach K's shocked reaction to what Kirby Smart says, and then use this as a rebuke against anonymous coach or Brian Kelly or Brian Day or whoever else it is that think they may have a chance to get a little bit of revenge on Georgia this year. The coach that speaks this way, does it sound like this guy wants to give up the top spot in college football anytime soon? Here is Kirby Smart with Coach K.
You know, winning the national championship is amazing, but the record that you guys have had in your conference, your seniors, to go 49-5 in a 4-year period, nationally, but also in your conference. What does that say about your culture, the culture that you've created?
In this league of football where so many kids are drafted and every game is so tough, it speaks volumes for the leadership of those kids. That senior group, they wouldn't sacrifice what they believe in, how they practiced, the work ethic in the off season. It was a special group of leaders now because they went into every game not thinking about the score, not thinking about winning. They wanted to make the other team quit, and they played angry and mad. And I really love the way they practice. I mean, they would practice harder against each other sometimes than maybe they had to play in certain games, and I loved it. I loved the practice that element of that.
Don't you love Coach K, the famous Duke coach, former Duke coach, his response to Kirby Smart? And Kirby's just being himself. He's just talking the way that he always does. Hey, our guys want to make the other team quit. And Coach K's like, well, I do declare. Like he's dropping his monocle in his soup upon hearing Kirby Smart speaking such, you know, bold, clear, unmistakable language. But the fact that this is how Georgia plays, that Georgia is not just physical, they're tenacious. That Georgia isn't just committed to winning, they find losing intolerable. And they don't want to just beat you. They want to humiliate you to the point that you want to quit. You want to give up the game. That's Jalen Carter toting Jaden Daniels around the football field while holding up one finger in the air. That's making you want to quit. You think the LSU players wanted to stay on the football field after that? No. If they could have hightailed it back to Baton Rouge, that is exactly what they'd have liked to have done. The TCU team, after the glitz and glamour of LA wore off, how soon do you think they were ready to get back to Fort Worth on the heels or in the midst of getting beat 65-7? That Georgia has a habit of making the other team want to quit. And that's the same mindset that Georgia brings with it, I think, to the 2023 season. That's at least what they're trying to cultivate right now. And this is why spring practice matters. Georgia's got, 20 21 early enrollees in the program. They're learning how to be a part of a program that plays not just to win, but plays to make the other team want to quit. They look past the goal of winning to something far deeper and far worse than that for the opponent. So this idea, Josh Heupel and his fast-paced offense, they might be able to keep it close with Georgia. Good luck with that. This idea that Ryan Day found some sort of way to keep it close with the UGA, but when it was all said and done, it was Georgia who stood victorious. Michigan, who's won the Big Ten 2 years in a row. What happened in the Orange Bowl a couple years ago when they played? This Alabama team that supposedly still has it all figured out. They weren't even good enough to qualify to play Georgia a year ago, but the time before that, they wilted in the fourth quarter as Georgia marched towards a national championship. That's the level of focus that Georgia has right now. So Brian Kelly can talk about wanting to beat Georgia. Anonymous coaches can hide behind anonymity and talk about how you want to beat Georgia. But Kirby Smart is keeping on talking about how to make Georgia what it is. It may be shocking to guys like Coach K, who are not used to hearing guys in their sport speak that way, but that's just how Kirby Smart views life. It's that competitive edge that has made Georgia what it is and would make Georgia not really all that willing to relinquish its grip on college football anytime soon. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video. We get going here at 9:45 for our First and 15, DawgNation.com, Dawg Nation app. 10 a.m. after that on all video platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and available as a podcast wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, the Google Podcast Player. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. You can listen right there on SoundCloud if you want to. Lots of ways to hear our show. Just glad you find it somehow, some way. Got my Braves jersey on today. Looking forward to the home opener tonight for the Braves against the San Diego Padres. And our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, they're big Braves fans too. I've actually seen Bob's wife Ashley at Braves games before. They love hanging out and doing all that kind of fun stuff. And they love all kinds of fun things. Obviously, big supporters of UGA and big Dawg fans, traveling to all these games all the time. And yet they also understand that sometimes life isn't like that. The fun stuff, Braves games, football games. Sometimes life is about dealing with a serious issue. And for you, there may be no more serious issue than the notion of divorce. You may have tried to prevent it. You may have tried to pretend that it's not real and that it doesn't exist. But now you find confronting this reality, something that is unavoidable. You just have to do it now. And if that's the situation you find yourself in, then I want you to have my friends at Merriweather and Tharp as an advocate who goes along with you on this journey. Because, listen, some of this is about explaining the law. They're really good at doing that. Some of this is about identifying all of the available options, and that's one of those things that Merriweather and Tharp is really good too. But some of this is also just sort of rolling up your sleeves and fighting for what you deserve in a situation like that. And once again, if that's what it requires, Merriweather and Tharp is going to be there for you on that too. And they can also kind of set, I think, good goals for you about what it all comes down to is if you're in a situation where you have to get divorced and it's just something that can't be avoided, then you're looking to that next season in your life of, okay, financially speaking and relationally speaking and everything else, how can I be in a position to have more success, more happiness in my next season of life than I currently have right now? That's ultimately the question that stands over all of these divorce decisions, and Merriweather and Tharp can handle and help you out with all that too. So I want you to find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce, and great to have them each and every Thursday as a part of Dawg Nation Daily. Also great to have Terrence Edwards. We'll talk to him coming up in just a couple of minutes there as well. Prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse, and I'm going to make a little bit of a simple point here just for a moment on what I think with the Georgia quarterback competition based on something that both Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift had to say here this week. I want to start with Carson Beck because the question came up of, what are you noticing? And Carson's now going into his fourth year at UGA, so he spent a lot of time around Todd Monken, and now he sees the transition to Mike Bobo. What are you noticing from new offensive coordinator Mike Bobo? Carson Beck gave us a little bit of insight when he spoke to the media earlier this week. Here is Carson on that topic.
I mean, obviously, they're very separate people. I think every offensive coordinator is very different and brings their own, spark and, calls different plays, calls different things, does things different. Bobo's very energetic, love the way that he's been coaching recently, and I'm excited to keep working with him.
Yeah, so that's Carson Beck sharing some insight there on that about exactly what Mike Bobo kind of brings to the table. Some differences, but we've also been told that some of the continuity is remaining the same. The language that's been used, verbiage, things like that. But it was actually Brock Vandegrift who I thought had a little bit more candid description of what his early relationship has been like with Mike Bobo as the offensive coordinator. And this is what I think leads us to sort of an interesting conversation here today. Here's Brock Vandagriff kind of giving you a little bit of a pretty candid description of what one of his first conversations with Mike Bobo was like. Here's Brock Vandagriff on the topic of Mike Bobo too.
Coach Bobo, he's pretty intense. On the first day he came in the quarterback room, he said, "I'm gonna coach y'all hard, and I hope y'all are open to that." And heck, he didn't really give us a choice. He said, "I'm gonna coach y'all hard, and that's the way it's gonna go." And we all said, "Yes, sir." And I think it's been really good just the way he's been coaching us. He has a reason for everything he does. His meetings go well, and yes, sir.
So let me tell you why I think that's interesting. I'm going to be a wet blanket just for a moment. It is at least possible that Georgia doesn't have a good quarterback. Now you think, well, how could that be? Well, like it's just sort of mathematically possible that even a competition like this, the guy who emerges ends up not being nearly as good as a quarterback who just won 2 straight national championships. You have to at least consider that as a possibility here. But what I think makes that very unlikely is what Brock Vandagriff is saying there. That Coach Bobo told us from day one, I'm going to coach you hard. Now, let me tell you what I kind of read into that. And admittedly, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I'm sort of seeing between the lines deeper than I probably should. But think about your own kind of sporting experience, whatever that was, as a coach, as a player, whatever else. If Mike Bobo steps in on day one with the confidence to say, I'm going to coach you hard, let me tell you what I believe that says about Mike Bobo. Experienced coach, been around the block many, many times. If Mike Bobo on day one is delivering that message, I'm going to coach you hard, I think that means he thinks, Bobo in this case, that Brock Vandagriff can handle it. In other words, I don't think that Bobo had any fear about treating their quarterbacks carefully because he viewed them as fragile. And in some situations, you do have somewhat fragile quarterbacks. I don't mean injury prone. I mean the idea of, can I be the guy? Can I be a quarterback at a place like Georgia? Can I lead Georgia to the kind of success that is expected at a place like this? Fragile ego, fragile physical frame, fragile whatever else. Mike Bobo, I'm reading into this to say he doesn't view either Beck or Vandagriff as fragile quarterbacks. He's okay pushing them. He's okay challenging them. He's okay coaching them hard because he believes they can take it. And y'all, that is not true in every situation. I'm going to give you an example here. Go back to 2020 at Georgia when you had a competition that involved, a guy like Jamie Newman and involved a guy like, to a certain extent, I guess, JT Daniels, although JT was, I guess, hurt. Stetson obviously eventually emerged there on that. Had Dwan Mathis involved there as well. At the beginning of that 2020 season, unfortunately, Georgia just did not have an SEC-ready starting quarterback playing for them. And I'm not picking on Dwan Mathis. I think that Dwan Mathis is a fine young man. I think that he's an inspiring story in a lot of ways. God loves that young man, but he is not an SEC-level quarterback. And Georgia found itself in a real issue at the beginning of that 2020 season because of that. And some of what you heard about Dwan prior to that was, oh, he's doing so great. Dwan Mathis is really impressive during practice and this and that and that. And to me, admittedly, maybe more cynical than I should be, at times I was like, gosh, they must be really trying to build this guy up from a competence standpoint. He must really need it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be saying all these things, letting all this positive stuff leak out. Normally, Georgia plays defense against that kind of thing happening. But the fact that they were kind of pumping him up a little bit made me believe, gosh, they must really feel like Dwan Mathis needs an extra dose of confidence, and ultimately you kind of saw maybe why that was. Well, in this particular case, it's a completely different situation. You've got a guy in Brock Vandagriff that hasn't played before. You've got a guy in Carson Beck that hasn't played very much, but according to Brock Vandagriff, Mike Bobo steps up to begin with to start spring practice and says, hey, I'm going to coach you hard. I'm going to push you to be the very best you can be. I'm not going to hold your hand and walk with you towards eventually being the starting quarterback because I think you can handle the hard stuff here. And to me, that sort of speaks to the idea that whether it be Carson Beck or whether it be Brock Vandagriff, that Mike Bobo has the confidence to believe that the eventual winner in this quarterback competition is going to be tough, is going to be capable of handling what's coming his way in the SEC, and capable of withstanding the kind of hard coaching that will ultimately make him a better quarterback. I think that's a really interesting statement from Vandagriff in describing how Bobo spoke to them, and I think it probably speaks pretty well of what Bobo ultimately believes is the potential of both of these quarterbacks. That is Around the Doghouse here today on Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Fun stuff continuing here at UGA Spring Practice. Terrence Edwards gave us some great stuff last week. Let's find out what he has on his mind this week there as well. As we talk to him, glad to have him and all of you with us here as a part of Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let me bring Terrence Edwards in on this. And Terrence, let me see if your kind of thought on this. That Brock Vandagriff said this week that Mike Bobo told them that he was going to coach them hard. And to me, that sort of speaks to a level of confidence that Bobo must have in these quarterbacks, because if you're worried about your guy, your eventual starter, not being able to handle that, or maybe he needs confidence because he's just worried about filling big shoes, quarterback at a place like Georgia, then maybe you go a little lighter, maybe go a little softer. But the fact that Vandagriff said that Bobo said he was going to coach him hard at least leads me to believe that Bobo must kind of like and trust what he has in this quarterback situation and let the competition sort of play out however it does. What does that tell you about what Bobo must think about these quarterbacks?
I just think it's going to put them in position to see, can they take harsh criticism, see, can they take harsh coaching, because we need that quarterback. We need for him to have tough skin, because that position gets more praise than it deserves sometimes, and sometimes it gets more of the blame than it deserves sometimes. So I think that the staff is always trying to put the team in situations that it's going to come up at some point. I mean, just look at Stetson. I mean, he won a national championship for us last year. People still wanted him gone, and he ended up winning another one. So you got to be able to block out the noise and take the message, and not the way the message is being conveyed to you. So I just think, and when I was there, I saw Coach Bobo coaching them hard, getting on them hard, and it's going to help them in the long run.
I said this yesterday. I'm curious if you would agree with this, that to me, the G-Day format, which we'll all see on April 15th, sort of sets up a little bit more for a guy like Carson Beck, whereas I think that Brock Vandagriff might actually excel in a live football situation where you can be tackled to the ground, and Vandagriff's ability to avoid that, keep a play alive, maybe he takes off and runs, maybe he just buys time to make a throw, that's a little bit more like, the best opportunity for Brock Vandagriff. So for me, I guess to sort of put this simply, I think there's a little bit more pressure on Carson Beck on G-Day than there is Brock Vandagriff, because the G-Day format sort of feels like it's the right one for Beck. You stand there, you pick apart a defense, you make big throws. I'm assuming that Georgia will throw it a lot on G-Day. It typically does. That, to me, there's a little more pressure on Beck to perform well on G-Day than there is on Vandagriff. Is that something you would agree with?
I think so, but I look at it a little different than you. I think the pressure is going to come from now Carson knows it's his job to lose, and I think if he doesn't perform well, I think he will, in this day and age, he will hear the outside noise. He will hear, especially if Brock performs well. Now we ourselves, this show and all other shows are going to be to talk about, did Brock win the job? So it's going to be a lot of outside noise being talked about, and I think a lot of us don't have all the information, all the data that the coaching staff will have, and I think Carson just got to realize, and the fans got to realize, one spring game is not going to determine who's the starter. It's months and months of data that the coaching staff will have compiled, and they're going to put the best player on the field. But it's just the pressure of, can I take this team to the next level? Can I be the steady quarterback I could be? I don't have to be Stetson, and I don't think people are going to think he's Stetson, but just the pressure of let's just put it, I think Stetson is one of the greatest players in Georgia history. What he's done now, he has to follow those footsteps and try to keep us in the pantheon of the college football greats right now.
Well, when you got a chance to see practice, anything that you noticed about these quarterbacks that you would have found interesting, anything from like visually seeing them in a practice situation that stood out to you?
I think Carson is a little bit more athletic than we're going to give him, and Brock is probably more athletic. I have watched Brock. I did watch Brock play in high school, and he moved around. But I watched him move around in practice, and he can run. He can run. So I just think that the statue quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs is probably never going to be back, a guy that can't move the chains with his leg. And we got to give Carson a little bit more credit for his athleticism as well.
So when you were at Pace, y'all played Prince, right?
No, we was at Pace. We played Ravens, so I got to play South Sea Gunner.
That's right. But you said you saw Brock in high school, though. I think one of the things that like nationally has been misunderstood about Vandegrift because, he is athletic, but, at Prince Avenue, this was still a pass first quarterback. This was not a guy that was looking to run, primarily or before he looked to throw the ball. I mean, I think in some respects nationally, people outside kind of the bubble of Dawg Nation have kind of miscast Vandegrift as more of a running quarterback than he actually is, because the guy that I saw in high school, even though he was athletic, this was still a pass first quarterback.
Oh, most definitely. He's definitely a pass first. But if he have to use his legs to get out of any tough situation, he's able to. On the zone read, can he pull it and make a big play for us like Stetson did? Most definitely. But I agree with you totally that he's definitely a pass first guy. He's a guy that's not looking to run the football, but he can if need be.
I want to change the subject here for a moment. There's a lot of UGA newcomers who seem like they've had a little bit of buzz around them this spring. Maybe the most significant is Lawson Lucky, where it's like a lot of whispers and a lot of hey, I heard this guy's doing really well. I had a chance to see Lawson play this past season for Norcross. He looked good in the game that I saw him in, but it seems like, man, he's really earned a lot of buzz thus far this spring. What do you make of a guy like this, tight end, position that Georgia's historically been pretty good at the last few years? What do you make of a guy like Lawson stepping in and kind of generating a lot of conversation right now?
Oh, it doesn't surprise me. If everyone listening, and I've been saying this before he even stepped on campus, that Lawson is going to be the best route runner in the tight end position as soon as he steps on campus. And I just think, unfortunately, a lot of Georgia fans, when we first got his commitment, they was looking at he was only a 3-star, and we don't know. Lawson is that guy. I think Lawson is going to step right in when Brock leaves to be one of the better tight ends in this class. I don't want to minimize Oscar, because I think we got 4 fantastic tight ends. We haven't got the opportunity to see Piercy and skill set, but I just think the tradition of tight end is going to continue. And when I was there, I did get the opportunity to watch Oscar. Oscar's definitely put on a lot of weight. He's definitely bigger. So I'm just in that tight end room right now. Overall talent is up there with any positional group that we have.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the way you say that about Delp is correct, whereas the sense that I'm getting is whatever is being said about Lawson right now is not coming at the expense of Delp, I don't believe. Kirby Smart the other day talked about the fact that Delp's really improved as a blocker. That's going to matter this year. Obviously, Darnell Washington isn't here anymore. Jake Fromm the other day had some really nice things to say about Oscar Delp when he was on the show there as well. So the seeming emergence of Lawson Lucky, if that's what you want to call it, does not seem like it's coming at the expense necessarily of Oscar Delp. It just seems like, once again, Georgia, which had a million great tight ends a year ago, maybe in that same situation here again this year.
Oh, most definitely. I think that tight end room is just as deep. I just still believe that Darnell is just a unicorn that you don't see year in and year out. But the tight end room is in good hands. Even when Brock leaves, a generational talent, the tight end room will be just fine with the 3 that we have, and Landon Thomas coming next year.
Yeah.
That position is continue to outshine the others. There's some good tight ends in the 24 class that's high on Georgia. So the tight end room is going to be okay, but Lawson is definitely a guy that I've continued to talk about, continue to rave about, because he deserves that. I mean, he's going to make plays for us this year. He's going to get the opportunity to make plays. He's going to get opportunity to play as long as he's continuing to grow in the playbook and get the trust of the coaches. He's going to have an opportunity to showcase his skills, and I can't wait to watch him on G-Day.
No, I think that's exactly right. Let me ask you about one more newcomer here for a moment, because there's something else I want to touch on before we let you go today. How big of a deal is it for a guy like Roderick Robinson at running back? Now, listen, you never want people to be hurt, but Georgia's had Kendall Milton dealing with an injury. It's had Dejon Edwards dealing with, a similar injury, also a hamstring situation. It seems like in last Saturday's scrimmage, that created a big opportunity for Branson Robinson, who we've already kind of seen. A lot of Georgia fans like what they see there. Now, Roderick Robinson probably getting an expanded role on G-Day because of this. How big of a deal is it for him to be getting all these extra carries here this spring while the veteran running backs are on the mend?
Well, I take a little bit step farther. I'm not worried about his running ability and carrying the football. He's been doing that his whole life. What he's getting now is this extra reps and the extra coaching from Coach McGee on pass protection.
Yeah.
If you can't pass protect, then you won't be able to play in 3-down situations. So I just think he's getting the extra coaching because he's getting the extra reps on pass protection. And for what we believe, the G-Day will get an opportunity to see the ball being thrown a lot. He's going to be able to have to pass protect if those other guys, those more veteran guys, won't play in G-Day or be very limited in G-Day. He's going to get an expanded role, and he's going to be have to be able to pass protect. I think Kendall Milton was a great pass protector. If you saw, not Kendall Milton, McIntosh, if you saw his Senior Bowl highlights with his pass protection, I think they call he was the best pass protection back at the Senior Bowl.
Interesting.
So Coach McGee does a very good job of getting those guys ready. And if Branson Robinson can pass protect, he will get a lot of carries. And I saw the young man. He is a big, big young man.
Yeah.
Man, he is big. They don't make him like him. I can't wait to see how he progressed. I can't wait to see him be able to showcase his talent against the college-level athlete.
Who do you think, to do the running back thing one more time here, Georgia has had Sonny Michel, and it was James Cook, and it was Kenny McIntosh. There's always that versatile pass catcher in the running back room for Dell McGee and Kirby Smart here. Do you see that guy on this roster right now? Someone's going to have to do more of that than they've done in the past. Who do you think has the best chance of becoming the guy that catches the ball out of the backfield for this Georgia running back group?
Right now, with the experience, I have to go with Dejon Edwards,
Okay.
the guy, because I've seen him being able to catch the football. Is he Sony? Is he McIntosh? Is he Swift being able to catch the ball out the backfield? I don't think so. I don't think we have a guy on the roster that's in that category right now. So we're going to be able to manipulate explosive plays out of the passing game from the tailback from probably different ways because we don't have that guy on the roster right now. But I do like what I've seen. Dejon, I think, probably may be the best pass catcher right now because we've seen him play. I haven't seen the other guys really play and catch the football out the backfield. So just with the experience, I'm going to have to go with Dejon Edwards.
So let me finish with this. I was looking at some mock drafts today, and it seems like there's a consensus kind of forming. Now, who knows if it ends up being true, but I think Todd McShay, Bucky Brooks, Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network, all have 3 dogs in the first round. Obviously, Broderick Jones, Jalen Carter, and Nolan Smith is now really kind of perennial viewed to be a first-round pick. That means the guys like Darnell Washington and Keely Ringo going in the second round. I guess the consensus there is kind of early second, but nonetheless, day 2 pick for both those guys. Of Keely and Darnell, Terrence, who do you think has the more likely chance of kind of sneaking into the first round and at least giving Georgia that shot at 4 first-round picks? Is it a Keely or is it a Darnell in your mind?
I got to go with Keely. Only the reason because the NFL is a passing league, and if you can rush the passer or stop the passer as a defensive back, they put more emphasis on those positions. So if I have to just pick one, and everybody know how much I love Darnell, I'm going to have to go with Keely because of the receivers and the passing game that NFL presents, that, he's a guy that's got elite traits, big, tall, fast. And I think if he gets into a right system, he will be able to have a longer career. I just think if he gets into a system like Seattle Seahawks when they was a predominant cover 3 team with Richard Sherman and that type, I think he would excel. If he goes to a team that is a predominant man press team, I don't think that would be the best situation for him. I think he could go into a situation teams that is a predominant zone team with his skill set. I think he will flourish in that type of system, so I'm going to go with Keely.
Terrence, that's great stuff. We always appreciate your insight here on Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Of course, you're doing great work as well, getting folks ready for their upcoming seasons, pass catchers, tight ends, wide receivers especially. So if folks want to be part of that Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy and be a part of some of the great work that you're doing, getting folks trained up, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, we'll look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I love Terrence's answer, in that comparison between Keely Ringo and Darnell Washington, and I guess I might, say Keely on that too, just because that cornerback spot, that defensive back spot, is one that teams do kind of go. There's usually a little bit of a run on those cornerbacks in the first round of the NFL draft at some point in time, and so maybe Keely kind of gets caught up in that a little bit. I think your hope for Darnell is that after a pretty impressive scouting combine performance, that somebody somewhere just sort of fell in love with him. They're like, this is that special unicorn of an athlete that only comes around every so often. We're going to make sure we take full advantage of that. So if you take the mock seriously, respected guys, Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks, McShay, they got the 3 dogs in there right now. The good news is those 3 are in every mock draft. And the great news for Nolan Smith is he's gone from a guy that I think early mock drafts may have had back end of the front round, somewhere late 20s, maybe even 30th, 31st overall, to all of a sudden now you commonly see, Nolan being talked about as a top 10 type pick. And you really, you see Broderick Jones inside the top 15 almost every single one of these deals. So, maybe 3 first-round picks for Georgia if the mock drafts prove true, but it'd be 3 guys taken in the top 15 maybe, which would be quite a statement for Georgia there as well. So we'll keep our eye on that. Obviously, we have a big draft party coming up on the final night of our Dawg Nation cruise that I'm looking forward to. So much fun last year. Going to be a great time here this year as well. And speaking of that, how about we go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, because we are getting very close to that Dawg Nation cruise. And I just love the experience. You go day before, you kind of get settled in your hotel. Some folks stay in Orlando. Some folks like to, kind of be right there in Port Canaveral, Cocoa Beach area. You get that hotel room and you kind of watch the port and the ships that are leaving the day before coming in and going out, and you get a chance to see all that. And it's almost like a pregame party before the actual event itself. And on that Monday, April 24th, right there in Port Canaveral, we're all going to get on board, get it going, get it started, and have an amazing series of events, taking advantage of all the great experiences available to you on Independence of the Seas. World-class entertainment, unbelievable dining options, specialty restaurants, all kinds of bars and lounges literally everywhere you turn, live music all over the place. It's just a wonderful entertainment experience. And then in addition to that, a great collection of special events just for those in the Dawg Nation cruise there too. So for so many of you who are going to be a part of it with us, we're glad you're there. And for those of you who want your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience, our good friend Jessica Slater can help you with that. You can give her a call 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Let Jessica help you out with all of your needs for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And we're going to check out a special website that she made just for Dawg Nation folks. You can go to royaldogs.com and find that connection with her there as well. royaldogs.com for a lot more on that. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC here. And I want to start with what might be some good news for South Carolina, as Gamecocks had a chance to host somebody here this week. Pretty interesting prospect. I shouldn't even say prospect, a little bit more of a sure thing. Derek McClendon was a defensive lineman at Florida State. Played a ton, started for the Seminoles, on the field a lot. Graduate transfer looking to leave Florida State. And McClendon, because he is a graduate transfer, is able to take those visits and be a part of the transfer process right now, whereas non-graduates have to wait until the portal opens up again to begin the month of May. But McClendon is on the open market right now and visited South Carolina here this week. So for South Carolina, who I think you would probably say was one of the losers in terms of who it lost from the transfer portal back in the winter, all of a sudden maybe has a chance to be a winner here, because if you're talking about a defensive lineman who is good enough to play on a good Florida State team and get that experience, that's the kind of thing that would have a chance of translating here to the SEC. And for South Carolina, that actually finished last year's regular season with a lot of momentum. Beating Tennessee, beating Clemson. Clemson went on to win the ACC, and yet South Carolina still got that win against them. Obviously, there's something to build on for South Carolina this year with, Spencer Rattler coming back at quarterback. But, finding enough on defense, finding enough just roster strength in general is obviously a big part of all of this. And that's what a guy like McClendon could provide. No, indication yet of what decision he's going to make. But he does apparently visit South Carolina. Gamecocks have a chance to kind of win a transfer recruiting battle. And keep in mind, that's a September game for Georgia, and you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, in a relatively light September, is there any challenge coming at any point in time? Well, a South Carolina team who Georgia manhandled a year ago but did play better at the end of the season, are they good enough to even be on Georgia's radar to begin this upcoming year? Probably worth considering there and watching the kind of off-season in Columbia to see what they're able to do as it relates to that. I also want to do my part to kind of be I guess fair and balanced, if you want to say it that way. One of the things I told you the other day is that I think it's been really interesting how quiet things have been in Alabama spring practice. And to me, the dog that isn't barking the most, I guess, or isn't barking the thing that the quietness that has sort of stood out to me the most here is you're not hearing anything right now, I don't believe, with Ty Simpson. Simpson was the backup quarterback, less experienced than Jalen Milroe, who got a chance to step in and play a lot last year when Bryce Young was injured. But a lot of Alabama fans were of the hope that Ty Simpson might actually overtake Milroe and become the starting quarterback. And maybe that still happens. But you certainly haven't, at least I haven't heard any example of, oh my gosh, Ty Simpson's just tearing it up here in Tuscaloosa. I haven't heard that. That has not been, a rumor. There's not been a lot of chatter related to that. And one of the things I told you was it has been very quiet around Alabama spring practice. Well, at least want to give you one piece of positive buzz that we are hearing a little bit more of now. It seems like the former junior college wide receiver Malik Benson, it seems like he has had a very good spring. And so when you start to think about, okay, what are the building blocks here for Alabama to kind of get back into contention, to be better than they were a year ago? It seems like Benson's going to be one of those guys that maybe gets called upon to be that for Alabama. And I think it's important to point out just how much of Alabama's previous success has been propelled by wide receivers. And we can all insert our own wide receivers being injured jokes. Obviously, Alabama embarrassed itself with the way that it, complained about its injured wide receivers after the 2021 national championship. But it does speak to how important wide receivers have been. And you can see this for yourself when you look at former Alabama quarterbacks who were drafted very high, who are not exactly succeeding at a high level at the NFL. I'd say Mac Jones a little bit like that. I would say the Tua Tagovailoa is definitely like that. These are quarterbacks that are kind of leaving something to be desired, left lacking a little bit with their pro career. When you look back on their college career, a lot of their success wasn't just propelled because they were great quarterbacks, but they were playing with an incredibly deep crop of wide receivers. That's what Tua had around him when it was Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and, Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. And that's also what Mac Jones had going for him in 2020. And then, even some of what Bryce Young enjoyed in 2021 was obviously, really strong wide receiver play. Last year, Alabama did not get the same level of receiver play, and the team just simply wasn't the same. So I will be fair and balanced on this to say that in the case of Malik Benson, he's generating, I think now, the former junior college guy, generating the kind of buzz right now that would lead you to believe that maybe Alabama can be stronger at wide receiver this year than it was a year ago, and that could make the transition a little bit easier for whoever emerges as that starting quarterback, be it Jalen Milroe, be it Ty Simpson. So we'll acknowledge a little bit of positive buzz coming out of Alabama on the former junior college wide receiver. And then finally there's this. We told you yesterday the Troy coach had spoken up about Hugh Freeze's idea for playing in a different opponent for spring games. The Troy coach said, yeah, we'll do this. Well, more emphatically than that, Trent Dilfer, who Georgia actually plays this year at UAB, one of the interesting offseason pieces of news was the fact that Trent Dilfer, former, Elite 11 coach, analyst. He's done all kinds of jobs in football, most recently a high school coach. Well, Trent Dilfer's now the coach at UAB. Now, I think that Dilfer has a chance to be successful, by the way. But for now, he's just kind of a first-year coach, upstart program. And when he heard Hugh Freeze mentioning the idea of UAB being a team that Auburn would play, Dilfer has said, yes, please, 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 let us play this game. So you've got Hugh Freeze saying he wants to do it. You've got coaches in state saying, yeah, we want to do it too. And I thought the Football Scoop had a pretty good article the other day about, well, if Auburn wants to do it, if UAB wants to do it, then what's just stopping them from doing it? There's no law in place that says you can't do it. So we're going to find out how much Hugh Freeze really meant this as an idea, because it's sort of getting out of the hypothetical range now, the hypothetical realm now, because you've got Trent Dilfer says, yeah, please, we want to do it. We'll be there. We'll come do it right away. We need this for our program. So I still believe that eventually this is not going to happen, because I don't know if the SEC wants this to happen, because eventually these group of 5 FCS programs are going to want some financial compensation for bringing their team over there. You're going to have to pay their transportation and nothing else. And so, spring game wise, I'm not really quite so sure how much of an appetite there is to kind of spend money that you won't get back in terms of some sort of form of revenue. This may be one of those examples where everything being about money kind of costs you the chance to see something fun. But it is interesting to know that Hugh Freeze said this, kind of a big name coach in the SEC, and several other coaches said, yeah, sign us up today. And so we're going to find out how serious some of these people were about what they really said, because it sounds like the option is there to do this sometime in the future if that's what they really want to do. And obviously I think most of us would be in favor of this. Even if it was a team like, say, mean, Georgia State, for instance, if we're going to say Auburn's going to play UAB, the version of Georgia would be playing Georgia State or Georgia Southern, something like that. Would that be better on G-Day than seeing Georgia play itself? I think it would be. I think it would be a little bit more of an interesting type of thing. But we'll find out how real this thing actually is now that so many folks are raising their hand to say, yeah, Hugh Freeze, you want to play us? We'll show up and play you next year. So we'll find out how real this is. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean as we get ready to wrap up today. Special golden shoe for you. So today is obviously the beginning of the Masters, which I obviously believe is one of the greatest sporting events in the entire world. And so excited about that. Weather not great on Saturday, I don't think. We could have a little bit of weather issues as it relates to Masters, and you never love the Sunday finish on Easter Sunday. That kind of complicates your family life a little bit. But nonetheless, we love the Masters. And on a Georgia-themed show like this, it also gives us a chance to kind of go back to the very weird year of 2020. There was a lot of good stuff that was not good at all in 2020. We all remember that. But one of the things that was, I think, enjoyable for some of us, when the Masters had to be moved to the fall for that particular year, and as a way of kicking off that Masters Saturday with ESPN's College Game Day actually broadcasting from Augusta National, as surreal as all that was, the Redcoat Band was tapped to help kick off the Masters there that day, and one great sporting entity in Georgia celebrating another. This video from the Redcoats with the Masters as a part of our Golden Shoe here today. Take a look at this. So, yes, indeed, the lone trumpeter there welcoming the world to Augusta National back in November of 2020 for the very, very strange edition of the Masters that was. That was certainly a very great video to see two things a lot of us love, Georgia football and the Masters kind of together there that particular day. So we'll give a golden shoe out to Augusta National and the Redcoat Band for what they were able to do back in November of 2020. And with that, we'll wrap up today's show. Yes, indeed. That was a lot of fun. And for those of you getting ready to enjoy some Augusta National here this weekend, hope you're able to do just that. Hope the weather cooperates with you enough to be able to do that. If you're selling in to watch it on TV, we'll get these rounds in. Hopefully that is indeed the case. Now, for us on this show, our tradition, unlike any other, is the Gator Hater Countdown, because we like to believe that Georgia this fall, going back to Jacksonville once again, in fact, 205 days from right now to beat those lousy, stinking Gators. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. Now, can't help but notice that the number 205, also the area code there in Birmingham, Alabama. So guess what? A reminder to all those folks in Alabama that it's actually Georgia on top of the college football world, and it's Georgia taking care of its hated rival, the Florida Gators, and then everything else after that. So Dogs sit on top of the college football world, and as Kirby Smart said to begin our show today, looking to make the other team quit each and every Saturday. We love those results here and can't wait to keep talking about them with you. We'll see you tomorrow, Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on that. If you want to know, you didn't ask, but I'll tell you anyway, my picks for the weekend. So of the kind of favorite group, to me, you got to approach this a little bit like you approach like a Kentucky Derby or something like that. You sort of have to decide who you're going to take a stand against. And for me, I'm going to take a stand against John Rahm. That's the favorite I'd probably fade on a particular weekend like this. I mean, obviously, there's no reason to argue against Scotty Scheffler, a repeat champion. So, maybe pay a little deference there. I like Rory a little bit. He's really short odds to win the tournament. Kaylee Mansell likes that as well. I like Rory. I almost would say more fun just to kind of bet him on a top 10 finish or something. That's probably minus money. But bet Rory in a top 10 with a chance to win it. If you want some longer odds, I like Sungjae Im around 40 to 1. I like Justin Rose somewhere in the neighborhood of 70-ish to 1. Guys who play well tend to repeatedly play well at Augusta National. And those are a couple of guys who played better than not at pretty good odds. So that's my thought on the Masters. You didn't ask for that, but I'll give it to you anyway. And obviously we're looking forward to a fun weekend with all of that. Nice to know in this kind of Kirby Smart era for Georgia, we typically avoid Masters and G-Day being the same weekend. So now if we can just keep this off of Easter too, we'll be in good shape. All right, so let's dive in here, get your comments about Georgia football, and we'll see what's going on there. James Richard says, I don't want to see a live player win. Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people are kind of rooting against. Now, there are also some live players with big personalities. Some of those players have their own individual fans, including Bubba Watson, by the way, their own individual fans, even though, a lot of people in general kind of against the whole live concept. If there is a live winner, I believe it'll be Cameron Smith. And if I'm sprinkling some, action around here and there, I'd put a little bit on Cameron Smith there too. Now, the knock on, all the live guys is they just don't play very many competitive rounds anymore. So Cam may have won the most recent major, but I'm not sure he's played a competitive round since then. So that'd be the knock on a guy like that. But if you're looking at a live guy to get involved with, Cameron Smith might be that guy. Frank Patterson says the big school should go to the small team. The small school could earn money and sell tickets and concessions as compensation. They'll be losing money from scheduling changes in the future. That's interesting. It kind of makes me think, if the trajectory continues the way it is right now, like eventually Georgia won't be playing Georgia State or Georgia Southern. They may be playing Georgia Tech. So this may be Georgia Tech's way of being relevant in the future as being Georgia's spring game opponent. But Georgia going to there, that's interesting. I think a lot of people like that one trip to Athens in the spring, so I don't know that people would necessarily love the idea of Georgia going somewhere else, but I see what you're saying. Dawg Fan 05 says, I'm having a baby boy. He needs a golden shoe. Dawg Fan, that's awesome. Maybe like some tiny little booties. This is what they call those little the baby shoes, the booties. But that is awesome news, Dawg Fan. Congratulations on having a baby boy. That is indeed the case, and we will give you a golden shoe for that. Absolutely. That's great. That's great. So Ridgewfly says, what do you think about Shane Beamer wanting to fight Kirby Smart? He says, who you got one versus one? We were talking about this yesterday. Seems like Kirby and Shane got some beef. So I do believe that it is true that Shane Beamer and Kirby Smart probably are not great friends. I think that, some of the way in which Shane maybe left the program may have rubbed Kirby Smart the wrong way. I honestly don't know about that. I'm not sure, but I do think there's a little bit of a beef. When Shane was on the Bustin' with the Boys podcast from Barstool, he said that there was a coach he liked to fight. And I think a lot of folks immediately probably thought that was Mark Stoops because they had a little bit of a public beef with each other. But since then, there's been some thought, well, maybe it was Kirby Smart. So I don't know. Kirby was a former player. Was he a player? I don't know. Maybe he was too. That's interesting. That's an interesting battle. Kaylee, what do you think about that?
I wanted to ask, I actually wrote this down. Do you think that Shane Beamer is the obvious choice for the anonymous coach that said that about Kirby?
That's interesting. Is Shane Beamer the one who was saying the stuff about Kirby? That is interesting. Could they get him on the phone? Would he say that? I'd like to think Shane Beamer would put his name to something like that. I'd like to think. But it does sort of speak to, and by the way, Kaylee Manziel's been doing a great job for us all week. It does sort of speak to what a lot of people seem to think they know. Kirby was very animated last year in that game, gave you the big dramatic first down point and things like that. It certainly seems like there's a little bit more bad blood than some people might realize between these two coaches going back then. So you could be right about that. Cody Ledoux checking in today. Good to see Cody back in the comment section. Haven't seen him in a while. Glad he's here today. Fred Gunn mentioned Kennesaw State as a team that Georgia could play for a spring game. There you go. You probably don't want to play them in basketball right now, but maybe playing the Owls in football wouldn't be too bad. Frank Patterson says, what about a Dawg Nation invasion to Charleston Southern? Now, that I'd be in favor of. What if Georgia just started playing its spring games like destination locations? Go play Charleston Southern. I'd be in favor of that. Spend a weekend in Charleston for a game like that? Absolutely. Does Savannah State still have a team? Go play Savannah State. Spend the weekend in Savannah. Get some golf and some fishing in. That wouldn't be too bad at all, I don't believe. For sure. Thomas Tyson laughing about Kirby Smart talking so much trash in the South Carolina game. Yeah, Kirby's fired up. Kirby was fired up. Cody also says he thinks the Bama's going to be better than I think, meaning me. He says you got to put some trust in the GOAT. So, Cody, tell us then. You're here. I'm glad you are, Alabama fan. Who's going to be the starting quarterback? And would you agree with me? And maybe you wouldn't. You have every right not to. Would you agree with me? It's been a little quiet this spring in Alabama as far as the quarterback competition goes. Would you agree that that's true? By the way, Frank Patterson says Cody owes him $200. There you go there on that. Antoine Sampson says Georgia Southern's another option. sort of tired of seeing Georgia and Georgia Southern play during the regular season. I think they've done that enough times now. But a spring game opponent, I wouldn't mind that. Blind Squirrel Sports, that's funny. That's funny. A lot of folks weighing in there on that. Let me go to the other comment section for a moment. Let me pop over to Dawg Nation. We'll get there. Columbus Dog has his picks. He says, obviously, Scotty Scheffler, maybe JT to contend. So, like, there's a handful of guys, good players that don't have a great history at Augusta, JT being one of those. He mentions Patrick Reed, Corey Connors. Connors won the Valero last week, didn't he? Didn't he just win on the Valero last week? He also points out, if you kind of a casual golf fan, you sort of care, sort of don't care, depending on the situation. I do think this is one worth caring about because, Tiger's in the field again, and I don't know how many more of these you're going to see from him. Phil is back this year after not being there a year ago. And plus, like, the dynamic of the LIV and the tour being together for this event, man, I'm telling you, that's pretty good drama. DT says I'm the new Jim Nance. Jim is a guy that I really like, really, really like. And I love the control that he has over these sporting events. And I know that a lot of the internet thinks he's a little bit corny, but I think I'm probably a little bit corny too, maybe. So maybe corny guys stick together. Jim just broadcast his Final Four. And I always think about how amazing this week must be. You go from the Final Four, you call the championship game on Monday, then you're heading to Augusta, you're at the Masters, and that's an amazing week. Not very many broadcasters can say they've put that week together as many years as he has been able to do it. He's still going to be doing the Masters, still going to be doing football. I guess he's just sort of stepping away from college basketball. I believe it's Ian Eagle who steps into that bigger role next year, who's a great broadcaster in his own right. But, Jim Nance is an amazing one. He is an amazing one. So Richard Dees asked a good question. He says, with Stetson having 7 interceptions in both championship years, can Georgia starting quarterback go below par on interceptions in a championship run in 2023? That is interesting. Now, so let me bring this into a conversation that we've had before. So I'm going to take Richard's question about the interception over under total. So let me see if let me pull up his stat line. So if you look at Bennett's stats, as Richard says, you got 7 interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons. So if you gave me a choice of my quarterback this year will throw 7 picks, but he'll throw more. Stetson's average over the course of the last 2 years, 28 touchdowns. He had 27 a year ago, 29 the year before that. So he's averaged 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions the last 2 seasons. That's a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. If you told me I'll have 7 picks, but I can get 30 touchdowns, I believe I'd take the over on touchdowns and tolerate the interceptions more so than I would say, okay, I'll get fewer interceptions, but that also comes with fewer touchdowns thrown. I believe that's the case. Because I'm just going to give you a comparison here for a moment. Like, there's a way to, like, if you look at, like, Hudson Mason's stats from 2014, Hudson's a guy that did a good job of avoiding interceptions, but to really give your team the best chance to win, you'd like to have thrown more touchdowns. Yeah, so he only threw 4 picks in 2014, but he also only threw 21 touchdown passes. So oftentimes that really, really low interception total sometimes comes with a reduced touchdown total. So, Richard asked a good question. Can the new Georgia quarterback throw fewer than 7 interceptions? He might, but I would be okay with 7 picks if you also gave me that 30-plus touchdown number. I think I'd be okay with that. Let's see what else is going on here. Let me go to the Facebook side of things for a moment. Facebook always loads really slow. All right, on Facebook, Alan Verbancic says Bennett's interceptions came from forcing the ball to try to keep the drive going. Need our starting quarterback to tuck and run or throw the ball away. Yeah, it could be the case. Gary Westmiller says with our defense, interceptions can be negated. And so, Gary, I completely agree with you on this. But this is one of those things that's sort of hard to get other people to buy into. some people, it seems like conventional wisdom in football is when you have a great defense, well, therefore you don't need to try to make too much happen because your defense is so good. But I'm kind of like you, which is, hey, if your defense really is good, and in Georgia's case, great, then it's sort of okay to be a little riskier on offense because if you put the defense on a short field, oftentimes they're just going to be able to get off the football field anyway. That it seems like conventional wisdom is, well, when you have a great defense, then you shouldn't take too many chances on offense because you got a great defense. But if anything, if you've got a great defense, it ought to give you a little bit more bolstered confidence to take some chances on offense because your defense can bail you out on the occasional short field situation. Denise White Loper sharing that Lucy Bowers Boykin's dealing with a family emergency. Denise, please pass along to her that we are praying for, indeed, and that is something we mean sincerely. So we love Lucy. We love her being a part of what we're doing here, and please let her know that we miss her and that we hope everything's okay. David Faulkner says, don't forget you got to add the Bennett rushing total on that too, which is a good point. That is a very good point. Very good point. Naturally, ESPN doesn't have the rushing total on there for him, but you're right. You got to add the rushing touchdowns to that to get the full picture of what Stetson brought to the table. You're 100% right. All right, a couple of more here. Alan Verbanchik says this defense could be better than 2021. I totally agree with you on that. Oh, I didn't know this. Jamie Huff says the Florida State defensive lineman who visited South Carolina is from Elberton. He says that He says he's from Elberton, played football for the right there in the Granite Bowl for the Blue Devils, and after college he moved to Tucker. That's interesting, Jamie. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that. Craig Jones says once the quarterbacks settle down, the interceptions will go down. Be ready for Tennessee. Want to stomp a mud hole in Rocky Top. Yeah, let me tell you something. That's going to be a massive game again, and you better believe that Georgia fans are going to be going up there. Oh, my gosh, what's that going to be like? Oh, my gosh, what's that going to be like? Ooh, that's going to be something. That is going to be something. Pete Williams says, with our defense at times, a pick is like just having to punt. Yeah, in some respects, that's kind of true. Barry Watkins wants to put Beck and Vandergriff on the field at the same time with Vandergriff as a fullback. That could be something. Jeff Ingram says, who says UT will be great? That's a fair question. I mean, obviously, they had great success with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt's gone. Now, my guess is they're still really good on offense and pretty shaky on defense. My guess is that Tennessee this season will look a lot like Tennessee did last season. But there's obviously, some chance of the changeover at quarterback. They actually don't replicate the success they had a year ago. Miriam Corbin suggesting maybe a little Dawg Nation invasion in Knoxville. I don't know what the appetite is for that around here, but you never know. That's an interesting idea. Kevin Cook says dogs need to break out the hobnail boots at Neyland. Boy, I like that. I like that a lot. That's fun to think about. Back on YouTube here for a moment. JC says FSU should be much improved this year. Yeah, if you're looking for, kind of slightly off the radar playoff type picks, I think that Florida State's going to get some love. I think that Clemson's going to still probably be pretty good. And I think the changeover to offensive coordinator, bringing in Garrett Riley, could really help Clemson. But Florida State obviously brings back, coach, brings back quarterback in Jordan Travis. Jordan Travis is a good player. He could have a very good year. Florida State, LSU to begin the season is a very big game. Keep that in mind, y'all. We got year 2 of Florida State LSU here. They played a thriller Labor Day weekend to start this past season. That's going to be a big game for us this year too. Going to be a lot of fun. Rocker 555 says, what do you think about Stetson in the NFL draft? I'm going to go 4th round pick for Stetson Bennett. I'm going to say 4th on Bennett, which I think is a pretty good spot for a guy like that to be drafted. And I think that Stetson sets up to have a real legitimate NFL career. Maybe it takes place as a backup, but that can be very big money. So a 4th round pick with a chance to really have an NFL future. Ridgefly says it seems like the only way teams are competitive against Georgia is by throwing. Bama 2021, Ohio State Peach Bowl. Do you think with recent great defensive back recruiting, Georgia is unbeatable? I mean, I certainly think it could be. And, in the case of, Bryce Young in the SEC Championship of 2021 or C.J. Stroud in last year's Peach Bowl, I mean, you just sort of got, heroic performances from both those players. And in the case of Stroud, I mean, I think that he probably played better in that game, and maybe at times he'd played during the season. So, I don't know that I take a ton from that in terms of, well, that just sort of goes to show you that Georgia's vulnerable. I don't think that's what you're saying either. But obviously, when you've got the cornerbacks that can go step for step with these receivers, if you can lock down, because Georgia asks a lot from its cornerbacks. It just does. It always has. I think some of what they've asked from those guys has probably diminished a little bit the last couple of years, but they're going to still put a lot of pressure on cornerbacks to lock down so they can do things in front of the secondary. And as Georgia's recruiting has gone up, I mean, I think the hope is, like you said, that it kind of, if there was any vulnerability on the back end of the defense, that moving forward it just won't exist because of how deep the crop of Georgia's secondary talent is. Andy Payne says, see on the cruise. BA, go Dogs from Tifton, Georgia. Randy, I'm glad you're here. Cannot wait for that. Boy, it's going to be a good time. Going to be a good time. Paul Moon says, I'm going to be interested to see if Joe Milton can keep it up for an entire season. He says that and Tennessee's refusal to prioritize defense makes it a little less scared of them. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know in the case of defense if it's a refusal to. I just think that, y'all hear me say this all the time. Every decision you make comes with some consequences. And so Tennessee chooses to play very, very, very fast. If you were at that Georgia-Tennessee game a year ago, maybe even from TV, you could tell this. I mean, the speed in which they try to go is noticeable. I mean, it is noticeable that you are excited about Georgia getting a stop, and then Tennessee's right back under center, ready to snap the ball again. I mean, they definitely play at a noticeably aggressive pace. But that is not good for defense. It's just not. And obviously Tennessee's thought is we're going to be so aggressive on offense, we're going to be so fast-paced on offense that we can tolerate, a defense that's going to be a little gassed at times. And I would say that the imbalance has not worked out particularly well for them, at least in terms of being a truly great team. It just hasn't. They're fun to watch. The offense is quite capable. But when you choose to play that way, you do make some sacrifices on defense. Because if anything, they've probably actually overachieved a little bit defensively compared to what you probably would expect them to do. But in terms of really being a forceful, capable defense to go along with that kind of offense, I just don't know if that pairing's ever going to quite work out all that well. Now, your point about Joe Milton, I think, is an interesting one, too, because, look, Nico Imaleva, or however you say his last name, I mean, he is obviously waiting in the wings. And if you believe any portion of like the NIL rumor mill that's been out there with him, that's a guy that comes in with a lot of fanfare. Milton, to me this year, Joe Milton I'm talking about, is going to be a little bit like the 2023 version of what Will Levis and Anthony Richardson were like this past season. Now, Milton doesn't run around like Richardson does, but Milton's got an amazing arm. I mean, Joe Milton's arm, I mean, he can, what is it, the line from Napoleon Dynamite? He can throw it over them mountains. I mean, he can throw it over them mountains. He really can. Tennessee's got some mountains. I mean, Joe Milton can throw the ball out of the stadium if he wants to. So his arm strength is going to get the attention of a lot of NFL draft scouts and things like that. But, he had a chance to win the job in 2021 and just couldn't hold on to it. So now it's supposed to be his time, and holding off for a full year, as you say, a quarterback like Nico may be kind of hard to do. But there's no doubt that the arm strength that Milton has is going to make him the kind of version of a Levis, or to a certain extent of Richardson, of, NFL scouts may be wowed by him, even if his overall on-field results aren't great. Memphis Dog says Nico's getting a big McDonald's bag full of cash. Indeed, that's the case. Thomas also says he's at the SEC championship game. Those LSU quarterbacks can sling it. And I think it's interesting how you say that, because I think the best path forward for LSU is playing both quarterbacks. I think that Jaden Daniels – I don't view Jaden Daniels as a national championship level quarterback. I don't. But I do think he is a very intriguing athlete. What you saw from Garrett Nussmeier when he came in that game after Daniels got hurt was, this is a guy who's a little bit more of a traditional passer, and he was very effective. Now, that was kind of a wild game and kind of a reminder of why Georgia doesn't play a lot of 50 to 30 games, because that was kind of a wild one. But if you could find a way offensively to incorporate Daniels plus Nussmeier, A, it would prevent one of them from transferring, most likely Nussmeier, and B, I just think it would be a lot for defenses to have to think about. I really do. If you're trying to put defenses in much possible conflict as you can, finding a way to play both of them, I think, is what you should do there. Foster Moss says Milton throws how Michael Vick did that old Powerade commercial. Yeah, I remember that commercial. That's a great commercial, for sure. for sure. Jalen Jackson says LSU poses the biggest threat in the conference. Georgia, returning quarterback, electric wide receivers, superstar edge rusher, great coach. They're what everybody wants Bama to be. I sort of agree with this. I do. I think there's a chance that LSU is just better than Alabama. I think you could be right about that. And you mentioned, Perkins, the guy coming off the edge. That's what a lot of these. It's like if you've got that one real game wrecker on defense, it does give you a chance to stay in every football game. And I think that Perkins is almost as valuable on that defensive side as anybody is in the conference. JC talking about Brian Kelly. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot about Kelly that we might find a little bit weird. And, clearly he was below the national championship standard at Notre Dame. But part of the reason why he came to LSU is because he wanted to see if his coaching success, and you can't really say he's not a good coach. They may not have beaten the best teams, but they very rarely lost to bad teams at Notre Dame. So, Kelly came to Baton Rouge for a reason. He wanted to see if his coaching acumen could be paired with LSU's talent, and that could be kind of the missing ingredient that got him over the hump to win a national championship. And, he did a bunch of weird stuff last year. The whole family thing was very strange. But by the time it was all said and done, Kelly was coaching very well. And I think that Kelly's been accepted now by those LSU fans because ultimately it always kind of comes down to how much you're winning. Fred Gunn pointing out that Perkins did not do anything in the championship game against Georgia. Yeah, Georgia did a good job of keeping him at bay. You're right about that. Jonathan Aaron says, with everything going on with the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, the new offensive coordinator, why don't they just draft Stetson Bennett? He already knows the offense, plus all the head coach needs to do is call his brother, which is, really funny. Yeah, I guess I don't really know how harmonious the relationship with Todd Monken and Stetson Bennett was. You had Buster Faulkner kind of working, I guess, as the go-between between those two guys. I don't quite know about that, but it would certainly get a lot of attention from Georgia fans if that's the team that ends up drafting him. I mean, my big takeaway on the Ravens situation is this just goes to show you Todd Monken just wanted to be in the NFL. I mean, he was interviewing for the Tampa job. They don't have a quarterback. Willing to go to Baltimore, probably already knowing that Lamar Jackson was likely on his way out the door. To Todd Monken, apparently that didn't matter. He just wants to be back in the NFL. All right, we're going to do final comments and get ready to wrap it up for today. Foster Moss says Georgia's good at shutting down those elite edge rushing defensive ends like Will Anderson and Perkins and Hutchinson. Yeah, you're right. That's been a big key to that success. Those guys in those, sort of do or die type games did not have big numbers against Georgia. You're right about that. Frank Patterson asking about LSU and the ATM game where it's at this year. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which spot that goes. Peter Shandoff says that Savannah State does still have a team, so there you go. We can have a weekend in Savannah. Get in there and eat some good food. Go to Tybee Island. That'd be good. I wouldn't mind that. A little spring game in Savannah. So Georgia could do like a spring game tour, which is like, okay, we're in Savannah State for a game. That wouldn't be bad. That wouldn't be bad at all. Paul Moon says you could always play the Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm sure that'd be quite a football team. All right, let's do some final comments here. Randy Hall says, predict the starting backfield, defensive backfield. So I'll go Kamari, obviously. Malachi, obviously. I'll put Javon at safety for right now. I'll put Tyke Smith at star right now. And then I'll put Dalen Everett at the other cornerback spot right now. And that's probably the easiest, safest to discuss. Veteran player who may make some noise before it's all said and done is a guy like David Daniel-Sisfin. And then, the guy that I'm really curious about back there right now is Janelle Aguero. Is Aguero so good that he has to be on the field somewhere? That's the one guy that can maybe sort of impact this and kind of change some of those names. But if I had to pick, that's probably what I'm picking right now. DT says, I've never understood the pairing of touchdowns and interceptions. They're two separate things. I think the deal, though, is that in most cases, interceptions kind of come, especially, large numbers of interceptions kind of come from a player who's trying to make something happen. And, because the touchdown pass is the hardest pass to throw because that's the thing the defense always trying to take from you is whatever's going to lead to a touchdown. And so if you're making the kind of throw that can result in a touchdown, then you are going to be more likely to throw interceptions because, to go back to a phrase that we had the other day, I think it was Greg McElroy who was talking about this, and we've talked about it plenty ourselves, is that willingness to throw it into a tight window, meaning you've got convergence of multiple defensive backs here, that ability to kind of put it in between that and make the play. PDT says, would you really want to go play a lesser school when you're wanting the best out of competition? You got to play the best defense to see just how good your offense is, vice versa. Yeah, that may be the case. And NFL teams like us, I guess, obviously do this. Somebody had this suggestion. For those of you who follow high school football, somebody said, what if there's a jamboree? Like what if Georgia hosted a jamboree and you played like one quarter against 3 different teams or something along those lines? Can you imagine that? Like if you were a stadium, you hosted that, you brought 4 different fan bases in, your own fan base, of course, you might could fill the stadium for that. You get it on TV. And here's the thing that we know. Coaches don't want to be embarrassed. And so you say, well, what if instead of playing, Troy or UAB, what if Auburn played Georgia? Well, the problem with that is like you just don't want to get embarrassed. And by the way, not just Auburn against Georgia, but if you're Georgia, I think Kirby might be the first to tell you that, hey, when Georgia plays Auburn in September, Georgia's more than ready. But would Georgia be ready to play Auburn right now? Maybe not. If they had to play today, Georgia's not quite Georgia yet, because what makes Georgia Georgia is a full calendar year of weight training, mental focus, sharpness, getting young players acclimated. The version of Georgia, if Georgia played Auburn in April, that's probably not the same version of Georgia that plays them in September, because it takes a full year to kind of get ready to be that version of Georgia. So coaches don't want to be embarrassed. But if you did a jamboree type thing where you have like a stadium full of fans, 4 different teams there, if you only played for a quarter, well, you can't really say that so-and-so beat you, right? It's like it's only 1 quarter. So there's a little bit of a face-saving opportunity there for teams that, might not quite be excited about, putting themselves on display in a spring situation. Because you see this sometimes in high school football where you'll have a scrimmage or two, and sometimes these scrimmage results can be wild where, a lot of times in your mind, if you're following all this stuff, you sort of know who you expect to win. And sometimes it is not the way it goes down. Sometimes some of these teams are just not quite ready for scrimmages. Sometimes it happens that way. And but if you played the jamboree situation, you don't really have anybody getting embarrassed during a scrimmage. Everybody kind of save face. Plus, you get more chance to see more teams. So maybe we'll push that as an idea. We'll host a Dawg Nation Invitational at Sanford Stadium. It'll be Georgia and 3 teams from close by. DT says 1 quarter against 3 teams. Aren't we missing a quarter? Well, maybe so, but I don't, I forget what the exact format of the jamboree is. But if you play 4 quarters, you have to play some team twice unless you bring in 5 teams. Johnny Surf Dog says, my fellow Dawg Nation fans, our coach is dominating college football right now, and all is glorious. Rejoice. All hail King Kirby. No doubt about that. Let's see what else. Randy, I'm sorry. I think Richard had a good question. Yeah, Richard D says, if Alabama was gifted into the 2022 playoff and met Georgia, what element or strengths did Bama have that could have brought a win against Georgia? To me, the only thing that Alabama could have potentially had, a healthy Bryce Young is obviously a lot to deal with. There's no question that's true. But this idea that Georgia is lucky that they didn't have to play Alabama, as some may would have suggested, we obviously don't believe that's the case. We think that Alabama wasn't good enough to qualify to play Georgia, as you point out with your question, Richard. So I think the overall point of view here is that an Alabama team that wasn't capable of beating LSU was not going to be capable of beating Georgia either. But obviously, Bryce Young would give them a fighting chance, but ultimately it's probably Alabama that's lucky it didn't play Georgia. Because if it did and the result wasn't pretty, then some of the heat we think Nick Saban's eventually going to feel from his own fans, he may have felt that this offseason. Joseph Kennedy says, I don't want to risk an injury in a meaningless game like a scrimmage, which ultimately may be the reason that none of this kind of stuff happens. So, Joseph, that may be the reason that – and the Jamboree thing I'm mostly just kidding about. But to Hugh Freeze's idea, the injury part, maybe that's why this doesn't happen. But I think Freeze also said – I think he said this. Somebody said this. Is that if you play a different team, you're actually reducing your chance of injury by 50% because against another team, you only have half the players on the field, whereas in a spring game, 100% of the players in the field are your own players. So if anybody gets hurt, it's one of your guys. But if you're playing against somebody else, now all of a sudden your team is only half the players on the field, so therefore your injury risk has been reduced by 50%. Jerry Popham says, I don't particularly like any – let me read this. I don't like anything related to giving away anything about our strengths, weaknesses for free in meaningless ways, such as games where our coaches are not in control of what is shown. No to a change from basically what Jerry's saying is he doesn't want to play an opponent during the spring game because he thinks that could become film that could be used against him. That's probably true. It's one of the reasons why Georgia, I think, keeps it really, really vanilla during its spring game because they don't want that to be a game film for anybody. And I'm guessing all the teams going to do it the same way. But I say this every year, and this is one of those things that I wish more people would notice. And I think that Georgia does it this way, and I do think Alabama does it this way too. So for the most part, Georgia's spring games are good on good. And other spring games are not like this. Y'all, other spring games around the SEC are essentially fixed. They're basically like manipulated, where you'll put the number one offense against, scrub defense as a way of finding some easy generic points being scored, and it basically results in a spring game that's a little bit of a farce because when you put the best offense against some of your lesser defensive players, well, they should score, and that puts some points on the board. Fans get happy because casual fans have a tendency to root for offense over defense, and that's basically what goes on. There are a lot of spring games in the SEC that if you really dug deep into who's on the field competing against who else, you'd find out these are, this is a work. This is a fix. Whereas Georgia doesn't really do that. Georgia has a legitimate competition where like the guy you're on the field with is your counterpart on the other side of the ball. And so at least that alone produces something that at least resembles a little bit more like real football from G-Day. So I say that every year, and I'm probably the only one that complains about this, but I do believe there's a lot of manipulating the narrative in a lot of these spring games. All right, we got to go. Final comments. Anything else? Barry Watkins says, great to be a Georgia Bulldog. Totally agree. Let's see what else. MG over here. I guess everybody's going to go at G Grace right now. Crow King 123 says, so if you don't want to give something away, then you play the lower division school where you can dominate them. You don't have to show very much. That's probably true. Foster Moss brings up a really good point. He says, we're going to go into Brock Bowers' final season soon. We better appreciate his greatness while it's here. It seems like he just got to UGA. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys just sort of cycle through the program so fast. And I do think taking time to appreciate what Brock Bowers is really, really important. I think people are starting to finally kind of gain a little bit of insight into just how amazingly good he is, but I think there's even still more of that could be done. So generally speaking, I think you're kind of right here, is that got to appreciate this, got to see it for what it is. An amazing football player who has completely redefined what even the notion of what a tight end even means in college football. Totally agree with all of that. Let's see what else. Blind Squirrel Sports says, will we ever see UGA versus Kennesaw State on the football field? So right now, Kennesaw runs triple option, right? That's triple, yeah. So of all the teams that Georgia's willing to play in state, Kennesaw State may be the least likely because of the triple option, but soon to be KSU grad Kaylee Manziel joins us again.
They won't call it the triple option. Brian Bohannon will get upset, so it's the spread offense. Spread offense,
but it is basically an option offense, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So of all the in-state teams, Kennesaw State may be the least likely to draw Georgia in the spring game because I think when Kirby ran Paul Johnson out of college football, I think that was his way of saying we ain't playing triple option ever again. He called his shot on that, said if you beat him bad enough, you don't have to play anymore, and that's exactly what he went out and did. So my guess is they're not volunteering to take triple option again anytime soon. Let's see what else. Justin Huey says he heard that Beck and Delp have good chemistry. That sounds good to me. Crow King 123, happy to have another Kennesaw State alum in the program here. George Foster Moss says that Georgia should rotate between Kennesaw State, Georgia Tech, and Southern. Yeah, that's exactly right. Maybe in the future, Georgia Tech's a little bit more in common with the others than a traditional Power 5 for sure. All right. Anything else before we go? Yeah, Richard D says if a dirty coach or player from a rival team wanted to, they could target a player during spring. You could certainly do that for sure. And then finally over here, Miriam, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. All right, we got to get ready to go here. All right, y'all have a great day. Enjoy yourself. We'll come back. We'll have a big show to close out the week tomorrow. Recruiting Talk with Jeff Sintel. That is always a lot of fun. Also, check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. I told you about being excited about the Masters. We told you about that, and there's plenty of great coverage from Augusta National online, ajc.com. Also, Braves come back home for the home opener tonight, 5-1 after a series sweep in St. Louis. That is not an easy thing to do, but that is what Atlanta did. So you can find that coverage online, ajc.com there as well. And then check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. No telling how many Calcuttas and pools and things like that for the Masters Dari Pero is in from R.S. Andrews. I'm guessing it's a lot. But in the midst of all that, he's also taking care of you for your air conditioning. It's going to be 80s thing again today, so that's a reminder that spring's basically here. So go ahead and get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs, just $99, and it'll keep you cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. So find them online at rsandrews.com for all of that. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 9:45 for our First and 15, 10 a.m. after that for Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then.